Well, hello, this is very exciting. Simon and I are going to be reading the Booker Prize shortlist together, and I have kicked off today with Orbital by Samantha Harvey. And when I say kicked off, I'm only less than 20 pages in, I think. It's only a very slim volume. I already know that Simon really likes this book, so there isn't the kind of intrigue in terms of um, wondering, how he's getting along with it. But I'm wondering what it is, of course, that appeals to him about it. And my initial impressions are so positive. So it's a book set in space on a space station that's orbiting the Earth. And I read some years ago now An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield. I think it's one of my favourite ever non-fiction books. And one of the things I loved about that was the way that he captures the view that you get from space when you're looking down on Earth. And this is like Samantha Harvey is doing the same thing at the beginning of this text. You get the most exquisite, beautiful descriptions, which I'm really enjoying, of what Earth looks like, and particularly the difference between Earth at night and Earth during the day and that kind of thing. So I'm already really impressed by the poetry and the beauty of her writing. But one of the things that struck me as well is the way that she's trying to convey the scale of space and the sort of the sense of how long the astronauts are going to be up there. The size of the Earth as it spins, the number of rotations. So there's quite a lot of, she's peppering it with sort of facts and statistics that I'm really loving, because they're sort of, I don't know, I think she's really carefully selected them to sort of give you a sense of that scale. So that's also brilliant. And the other thing I like about it is you've got a real sort of mix of nationalities on this space station. So you've got Japanese, British, American, Italian, two cosmonauts from Russia. And the Russian cosmonauts seem to have their own sort of separate section, which is quite fascinating, because I presume because they're different space programs. And I like the way that we're gradually being introduced to the characters and sort of seeing things from their different perspectives. And also the way she's conveying the body's behaviour in space and the different kind of adaptations that the body makes. But more than anything, there seems to be a lot of kind of philosophizing. The characters are, she's thinking about the character's relationship with Earth and how being in space makes them reconsider perhaps the way they feel about their lives back at home, but also the way that they are shaping their relationships with each other. And obviously, if you're in space for day after day after day for hundreds of days with 5 other people, I think there's 6 of them, that they are going to become like a sort of family. And whether, are they more important than the family and the relationships that you've got back home, because it's such a unique experience and you're in such a strange environment. So yeah, I'm finding it really thoroughly and utterly absorbing at the moment. Anyway, over and out. I'm going to leave you with that for now.
Hi everyone. So, apologies for the lighting. It is evening. I have not long got back from holiday, which is not a humble brag, but actually is quite relevant because I read or reread, because I have read Orbital before, back in either June or July, one of the summer months beginning with J. I reread it up in the air on the plane, which is something I'd wanted to do purposefully, because I just thought, as I knew I was going on a plane, it'd be great to read it kind of above the Earth. I know I wasn't in space, but I want to kind of have the effect with the curvature of the Earth, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I also thought it'd be really good for content, which Mum did do a sort of mini eye roll at. I will show you the content I got. I got this, and I got this. Not great, right? But anyway, it was really kind of oddly nice reading the book higher up and getting that sort of added feeling, although I wasn't weightless and there were lots of children screaming, and that's not what's going on for these astronauts. But what was really interesting when I was rereading the first 20 pages was I hadn't noticed how often space is referred to as an animal or in an animalistic way, which I find quite interesting because apart from the mice on the space station, there aren't any other animals, and you can't see animals from space because you can't see humans or anything. So that I found interesting. Like, one of my favourite lines of like this year is in this book, which is, "Raw space is a panther, feral and primal. They dream it stalking through their quarters." But what I am remembering is how great the writing was / is. I think the sentences within this book are just so beautifully crafted. It's very interesting reading it not long after reading Held by Anne Michaels, which is also on the shortlist, because that has kind of a more dreamy, floaty, adrift kind of nature to it, whereas I would say this is much more condensed. And I think that matches actually the fact that you're in space but you're closed in, and the writing seems to be quite intense as well, a little bit like the emotions are. Also, the big thing that I hadn't realised had come so fully formed so early on with the writing is how these people are together, yet they could not in many ways be more alone. They're not friends, but they become a kind of family, but also they're not family. And it's how they also in some ways become, they don't only inhabit this spaceship, shuttle, space, satellite, space station, they also kind of become different parts of its personality in a way. And that's all happened by page 20, as well as us getting introduced to each of the astronauts. I feel like one or two of them aren't astronauts, they're something else, they're cosmonauts. There's a lot of information, but it doesn't feel overwhelming. But at the same time, there is this sense of it being overwhelming because you're in space with all these strangers, and at any minute something could go wrong. And that's looked at really early on. And also that links back to family, and they're thinking about their families, particularly because one of them is grieving, having recently found out that her mother has died. And then there's kind of a look at Mother Earth. And anyway, like I said, this is all within 20 pages. So I think that condensity for me is really powerful, but also sometimes you need to take a breath from it. But the point I was going to make was going back to family and going back to like this overwhelming and the sensations that they're going through. I hadn't thought about what it must be like if you've been in space and you've experienced that, and then you come back to Earth and you have no one but the people that you were with, or other astronauts or people who've been out in space with various different job titles, to talk to about that. And so again, there's that fact that they can often be very lonely when they're on Earth, but they're also lonely in space. There's something there. Anyway, I think I've prattled on possibly a little bit too long, but that's my initial thoughts. I'm really enjoying it again. I'm seeing more in it than I did the first time. It's definitely more technical than I remembered, but also still beautifully written, and I think that's a really deft thing to do. So yeah, I will catch up with you when I am about halfway, which will either be tonight or tomorrow morning. I need to go. Well, I don't know what I need to go and do. Well, shower and have some dinner. I'm going to crack on because this is a longer clip than I meant it to be. Goodbye.
So, apologies, it's a bit gloomy in my library right now because it's pouring with rain outside. Anyway, I thought I'd catch you up on how I'm getting on with Samantha Harvey's Orbital. I wanted to say Audible. And I think I might finish this today because I can't take my head out of it. I think it's such a privilege to be spending time in space, and I think she's creating that strange, still, ethereal world really effectively. There's a real sort of sense of calm in this novel somehow, and it's really reminded me of how good fiction can educate. I can't imagine the amount, I might have said this in my earlier clip, that I just can't imagine the amount of research you must have done in order to create this what is a very brief, short piece of writing. There isn't a word wasted here. And it also is reminding me how fiction can send you off on all sorts of, inquiries. There are lots of things now I want to find out about, particularly about the impact of being in space on the human body. So I love books that send you off into a whole sort of wormhole of investigation. And I think this book is certainly doing that for me. Um, I'm really enjoying particularly the character of Chi, the Japanese woman, and her relationship with her mother, and how being in space and being distanced from the world below is making her reassess her perspective on all of that. That's again, it's really well drawn, and I'm really, sometimes with books like this where you're in and out of different people's heads, I think there are characters that you're naturally drawn to, and I love the stillness and the sort of thoughtfulness of her perspective. There's also been a very interesting sort of discussion, if you like, for want of a better word, on death and the nature of death and how we react to death. And I found it refreshingly pragmatic. And I don't really want to say any more because that might spoil the novel for you if you haven't read it yet. So I'm engaged with that angle as well. So I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I want to finish it now because I don't really want to put it down. So I suspect I might see you a little bit later today. We'll see. Yeah, see you soon.
Morning everyone, I am now halfway through my reread of Orbital, and the themes in the book, I don't want to say it's more of the same because it's development of the themes that I've talked about, such as loneliness, and it looks at whether there could be, or discusses whether there could be more life out there, and actually maybe we are just alone hurtling through this universe, solar system, everything, which makes my brain do a bit of a, what's that emoji? I'll try and put that emoji over my face. Yeah, there's that element which does make me do a lot of, and I will say that the book gets more philosophical. There's also a lot about perception again in terms of photography. So there's both there's the photo that was taken from the moon landing, which is thought about quite a bit. And how did that picture encapsulate the whole of humanity bar the person that took it? Or did it actually not capture anybody because you couldn't actually see anybody? And then there's also a photograph that she has of her mother who's died that was taken on the day that there was that first moon landing. So you've got these sort of two pictures almost pointing at each other weirdly, and what that meant. But then also the kind of next sort of discussion from that comes to what is mankind doing going to space. Then also the subject of what we're doing with bombs and wars comes up, and with that link of the photo of Chi's mother, again, there's more discussion about family. How do the family feel, be it their parents, be it their children, about them doing this job, be they an astronaut or a cosmonaut, because they are both in space. So there's that. There's still this little mention of space being like an animal, and there's quite a bit more about the mice in there, which I found quite hard to read. There's also just the fragility of the situation that they find themselves, but also humankind finds itself as it floats about space. And sort of there's a bit of what is the point? It gets quite philosophical like that. And again, my brain does that. I'll try and do that brain emoji again. So there's all of that in there, which is quite... And then there's also the discussion of what we leave behind, either when we die, when we leave a place, when we leave family, be it just for a bit, be it all the way out in space. There's so much going on, and it's definitely a thinky book. It's not really a book of, I mean, you get a lot of the backstories through snippets of each of the characters. You also get kind of mundane nature of what it's like to be in space, but again with that potential constant peril, what could happen. And also that is in a way, we get to find out why these astronauts and cosmonauts have ended up in space through the stories of their past, but also these little glimpses that they pass on to each other. They don't talk about their personal lives too much, but they also do because they've got to. They're all missing people. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. There's one point that I found really poignant about one of the astronauts who's thinking about there's also a moon landing going on as they're orbiting the Earth, and he doesn't want to go as far as the moon because he doesn't want to go any further away from his wife. And I just thought that was so beautiful, just a beautiful little moment. And there's a few of those that I think are very poignant in this, and the writing is just fab. Whilst also giving you the technicality of what these astronauts have gone through, the fact they go and have to stay in caves, in submarines, in the middle of the desert, just to see if they've got the metal to do it. Yeah, I find all of that really, really fascinating. So really, really, really enjoying the reread. It's dense, like I said, and sometimes I do need a bit of, ironic as it's going to sound, space from it, but I am very, very much enjoying it, and we'll report back when I get to the end. I can't remember the ending from the first time, so it'll be interesting to go back there and rediscover it.
So I have managed to finish reading Orbital. I didn't quite finish reading it last night, but almost. And I'm so glad that I've come across this novel. I don't think I would have read it if it hadn't been for the Booker, although I might have done because Simon, I think, probably would have recommended it to me to read. I just think it's a wonderful view of the Earth from space. It's a novel that's full of love for the beauty of Earth and for the beauty of space. And it doesn't just give you a perspective of space, of the Earth from the point of view of the astronauts. It also gets them thinking about space itself and the scale and shape of it. And I loved that sense of scale, the way that she conveys that. There's a passage in it where two of the astronauts are describing, or she's in their heads, sort of describing the first spacewalk that they do. And I can't remember which countries it referred to, but you know, your boot is covering Italy, for example, and your hand is covering, I don't know, the UK. That idea that with a one of your extremities you can completely cover a whole country. I thought that was stunning, and all the way through the novel she does that. She gives you this really fantastic perspective. I don't know how she managed to, the research that she must have done to produce this book is huge, and I feel it's the sort of book that really expands your mind. It's she explores the psychology of the experience, and there are moments where there are just these little truths that you could quite easily miss, but you don't, because she makes sure you don't. For example, when she talks about Earth being a place of want, and just lovely little sort of aphorisms like that really get you thinking. One of the other aspects of it that I really enjoyed was the astronauts as well themselves, because they're obviously different characters, but they almost at times seem to adopt this kind of hive mind. And in particular, she writes about the dreams that they have while they're sleeping, and sometimes the dreams become enmeshed in each other, and two astronauts might have a dream featuring some very similar items or events or whatever it might be. So the whole idea that living in that very small confined space can make your minds sort of perhaps respond in similar ways, and these are people from all sorts of different parts of the world. And the other thing that she does is she explores the kind of the impact, or links that to the impact of the itinerant nature of the astronaut's life. It's not just that they leave Earth to go and hang out in space hundreds of miles away from home, but even before they do that, they spend years training, where they're on the move, where they're currently packing and unpacking suitcases, and in each other's company. I loved it when she described, there's a moon mission as well in this novel, and she describes the final night before the astronauts get into the rocket and leave for the moon. There are 4 of those astronauts. And I loved that, the whole way that she tries to sort of work out what might be going through their heads. And they have a pretty ordinary evening having a barbecue, but of course it's not. It's the most unusual evening of their lives, because the next day they're going to get into this sort of very high-tech tin can and leave the Earth's orbit. So I just really, really love this book, as you can probably tell. And if they're all going to be like this, then, because I think the first video that goes out will already have gone out, will be on Simon's channel, and I think that will be discussing the novel Held. But this one, Orbital, is the first one that I've read and vlogged on. So, you know, if the rest of the novels, the other 5, are going to be as good as this, it's going to be a really tough choice. Really enjoyed it. Bye.
Hey everyone, so I have finished my reread of Orbital, and I had forgotten the end of the book. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, because something very poignant on Earth happens, and it makes it very much about like the fragility of human nature. And I think what I had noticed as this book goes on, it's very technical in terms of like the spaceship, the spacecraft, how it all works, what the training they've gone through, which I find fascinating. I don't think I'd want to go to space necessarily, unless at some point like there's a really nice bougie rocket that you can go on where you know you won't die. Anyway, but as it goes on, it becomes much more about what humans are doing to the Earth and the vulnerability, which initially is of the humans in space and looking at the vulnerability of the humans they know on Earth, but then kind of goes bigger in scope as to humans in general, animals, and what's going on with nature, and becomes much more of an environmental book. And I remembered that from the first time, but not to the extent that this happens. There was a point actually, and I meant to mention this earlier on, where I wondered if this was meant to be set now or maybe a little bit in the future. I wasn't sure. And so that's something that I have been like thinking about a bit, because there is little, like early on there's something about, oh, there's been no rain for days. And I was thinking, but I don't know. So it could be a bit out of space and time, but that also is such a big theme within the book, because it's kind of looking at how time is so different out in space and time is so different on Earth, but time is different for everyone. And there's one point where one of the astronauts is thinking about her husband and how he always knows where she is, because as she orbits the Earth, she's been continually watched, even though he can't literally see her. But he could be absolutely anywhere doing absolutely anything, and she wouldn't be able to pinpoint him on the map. She might be able to point at a landmass, but not exactly. There's little things like that I just think are so brilliantly done and really make you pause for thought. And as I said before, it's a really thinky book, and I think that's like brilliant, because yeah, I for me there's like, some people might say, well, what's the solid point of this novel? And that's not what the point of this novel is at all. This book is in a way about everything in all that amount of pages, and I do just think she's such a genius writer. I have realised that I haven't really talked about what I think Mum might think. I hope she enjoys it. I think she'll like the writing. I do think it is quite a dense piece of work. I've said that a few times, and I definitely have enjoyed the reread and spotting things that maybe I didn't read before, partly because I'd been keeping this book and savouring it for like a rainy day, because I love Samantha Harvey's writing so much, but once I started it I pretty much inhaled it. So it's been really nice to read it much more slowly, take breathers from it, give it some space, as I said. And I just think it's not going to be for everyone, but if you love it, you're going to really love it, and I'll probably love you quite a lot, because I think these are the sort of books that I couldn't read continuously. And actually, I don't think I've read anything quite like it anyway. But they're the sort of books that, because philosophy, I won't lie, really kind of freaks me out. I just think my brain is, I'm just not clever enough for that. But this felt like I could look at some of the philosophical questions and think about what we're doing to Earth, and think about time and space, and think about, well, it's not philosophical to think, would I go into a spaceship or not, as we've discussed. But yeah, it's a very thinky book, that really does encapsulate how incredible it is that we are here, how small the chances there are of us being here. And I think it's a book that's quite life affirming, even though quite often it looks at quite difficult, daunting, big questions. But the other thing that I forgot to say earlier is it's also very funny. There's one really funny particular scene. I mean, there's several throughout the book, but one really made me laugh, which is about the fact that there's a toilet for the Russians on the satellite and then a separate toilet for everyone else, the Americans, the Europeans and the Japanese, and how like they're given these rules about it, and there's just this delightful kind of mutiny towards that, or a poutine maybe. Anyway, I'm going to go and hand you back to my mother, but yeah, I heartily recommend this. I think if you think this is maybe going to be too philosophical, don't not read any other Samantha Harvey. Like The Western Wind is incredible. All her books are brilliant. And maybe actually at some point on my channel I will do a video all about her and her writing. There's one of hers I've not read that I need to get to. Anyway, I'm waffling on. It's far longer than I intended to, but suffice to say, I really, really love this book, and I really, really got a lot more out of it on a reread. Certain little distilled moments within all of the text really shone out all the more, and it was delightful to find new things and also start to remember what I'd really, really enjoyed before, but also kind of apt because this book is all about perception, but to perceive it in a different way on a second read too. I'll shush now and hand over to Mum. Bye-bye.
So all it remains for me to say is hope you enjoyed that, and I'd love to hear your comments about Orbital if you've read it, and also any thoughts you have if you haven't. But also to say that this week, Simon and I are reading Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, and we will be vlogging on that this week, and the recording will go out, I think, next Thursday on Simon's channel, so a week tomorrow. Hope that all makes sense. Hope you're reading along, and if you are, you're enjoying it. And again, let us know how you're getting on. Take care, everyone. Bye.